So today we're going to cover an interesting topic that a lot of students ask us about.
It's always very difficult writing about your pain, especially pain that is unprocessed. One of the ways to do that is through your college application essays. One of the ways to not do that is your college application essays. And that is something that's a tricky balance we're going to be talking about in this session today.
Yeah.
I told her about my childhood and we both cried.
Obviously, mental health should not be a reason to be held back, or you should not be dinged for that.
She wasn't a stepmother. She's the mother who stepped up to support.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the College Essay Scoop, where we pull back the curtain on all things college application essays. We're back again with more seasoned veterans of the college essay game to dissect, dismantle, and analyze why certain essays worked and how you can replicate those lessons in your own writing. So welcome, Annie. Welcome back, Megha.
Hello.
Thrilled to have you all. So today we're going to cover an interesting topic that a lot of students ask us about. The common application essay is an opportunity to demonstrate your growth and transformation through life experiences. A lot of students have diverse life experiences, some of them positive and some of them can be very negative as well. Some students have to face some really difficult situations when they're growing up. However, students also believe that it's impossible to know them as a person. It's impossible to get a full appreciation of their identity without knowing this part of their story. It would be a disservice or an injustice to the whole student if they were not to share this aspect of who they are, even if it was a little bit negative. And that brings us to the sort of category, which is the difficult experience essay, the trauma essay, and how to do it in a tactful and strategic way that still highlights you as a really wonderful and positive candidate at a university. And most importantly, one that is not going to bring down a reader, an admissions officer, when they read it, not drain their energy and make them feel sad and depressed after reading it, right? So it's a very tricky yet very doable type of essay when done correctly. But what are your guys' takes on this category in general?
There's another type of response that I often encounter, which is, I am not defined by my trauma. I am not defined by the things I've been through. So one thing that I do believe this video will help clear is, when should you talk about your trauma? Yeah. When is it perhaps the best way to represent who you are today and what you overcome? It's always very difficult writing about your pain, especially pain that is unprocessed. One of the ways to do that is through your college application essays. One of the ways to not do that is your college application essays. And that is something that's a tricky balance we're going to be talking about in this session today.
Yeah.
Are you able to balance that with a nuanced expression of, is it a complete downward spiral, or is there any uplifting feature or uplifting quality about your life, your experience? Do you take the reader not necessarily through an emotional roller coaster, but are you able to strike a genuine chord with your reader where they're able to empathize with you and not just feel sorry for you or feel just pity for you? It would be apt to call this how to not trauma dump while talking about your trauma.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Like, one thing I always tell my kids who do want to write about a difficult topic is that it should not sound like a sob story, like you're just
bloodletting.
Yeah, letting it out, venting, crying about it. Yes, write about it, but also process it throughout the essay, and by the end of it, either you emerge with an outlook that I'm not defined by my trauma, or the other way would be that I embrace it and I rise above it. It should not sound like you're just complaining about the difficult life that you've gone through. It may sometimes even come off that you were using that to get people to sympathize with you. So that should not be the case at all.
I think there should be a really clear goal at the outset about why you're choosing this topic. What specifically are you trying to highlight about yourself? Is it your resilience, your anti-fragility, or your compassion, your ability to navigate difficult situations? So if you have that in your mind, then as you're writing it, yeah, I would not use your essay as a way to process your trauma. Like, I would definitely recommend journaling, talking to professionals, etc.
Exactly.
This is not the place to bloodlet, as we were discussing, or to let it all out, but to be very, very tactful about what you choose to include and what you don't choose to, in a way that makes a convincing argument that this is going to be a really good addition to my campus, and most importantly is not going to be a liability, is not going to be someone who's going to be a threat to themselves or others once they come on campus. Disclaimer, it's sad as it is, but university admissions officers are very attuned to mental health challenges in applicants. And as sad as it is, some universities have actually come out and said, like, it might actually work against you. Only because we're trying to protect our student body as much as possible, and we don't want a situation in which someone is harming themselves or others on campus.
Just the whole idea of putting yourself or others at risk.
Right.
That is what
it's unfortunate.
you absolutely avoid.
It's an unfortunate reality. Obviously, mental health should not be a reason to be held back, or you should not be like dinged for that. But at the same time, don't portray it if you can avoid it. You know what I mean? Like,
if you are writing about it, make sure to mention how you come to terms with it and how you've made tangible efforts in dealing with it. And which has resulted in positive results.
Right. You're not like still in the thick of processing this. Totally. So I would love to go first and commence with a student. So a little bit of background. The student came to us and she was adamant from the beginning. This is the story I have to tell. I had this difficult situation in my childhood, in my home with my parents. And it's important to me to convey how that shaped me as a person in my essay. I think that will say a lot about me and it will reflect very positively on me from an admissions point of view. So at that point of time, we said, absolutely, like, tell us your story. And so she recounted this very heavy situation with her mother, in which basically she had an abusive parent, right, who was a part of her early life, and then eventually she kind of no longer spoke to her, obviously, because it was no longer healthy for her or her sister. And so once we heard that story, we thought, and she had written a draft as well when she came to us, and we read it and we were like, we can't submit this. Like, we can't in good conscience recommend that you say the story, at least in this way. It's impossible. It was so depressing, you guys. Like, it was horrifying to read, and I felt so heavy after reading that. So you could only imagine how an admissions officer would feel, right? So we did more digging and we thought deeper about, well, how are we shaping the story to have a positive upswing and to demonstrate your deep maturity in a very difficult situation. And so that's exactly what we did. So I would love to share some excerpts for you. And she's used the framing device of Cinderella. And she opens the essay by saying, this is not your typical Cinderella story. What was interesting is, rather than diving into how horrible her mother was to her, she talks about how grateful she is for her father and how he's the epitome of a girl dad. So I loved this paragraph. Right at the start, she goes, whenever they caught a glimpse of my sister and me, my dad's eyes would automatically crinkle into a smile. Arriving early from work, he'd whip out his clunky camera and film home videos of us acting out plays in the living room. We'd establish our own restaurant, and he'd twirl his imaginary mustache while dramatically sampling the Oreos we'd dipped in peanut butter. He'd weave our hair into clumsy braids, then tie them with a satin bow. I think this anecdote or this description is so girl dad, right? Like, you can almost picture dad just trying to figure out how to braid his daughter's hair, and it's very, very sweet. So the reader gets a positive emotion
right
at the
from
beginning.
the get-go. Like, it sets the tone, which is very important in all essays, but especially these kind of essays. Just like, even if you're dealing with a heavy topic in the essay, just setting the tone of positivity and upliftment right from the beginning.
And our goal with the entire essay was to exude, first and foremost, gratitude. Gratitude for all that she does have, as opposed to bemoaning the fact that she didn't get the mother or the happily ever after family that she might have wanted. So she goes on to write, in retrospect, he must have been in immense pain at the time. After years of infidelity, alcoholism, and theft, my mother had abandoned us on Mother's Day. His crinkly eyes never darkened. He never complained or spoke ill of what had occurred. A proud girl dad, he raised us with his whole heart, and we felt it. So we kind of introduced the conflict here that the mother, she was unfaithful, she was alcoholic, etc., and she abandoned them. She goes on to say that still, despite this abundance of love, I felt hollow, hoping against hope that our mother would one day return and we'd have our joyous reunion. After all, we shared blood, history, and even the shape of our nose. Naturally, she's grappling with this inner conflict of, I know she was bad to us, but she's also my mother. I'm not ready to let that go yet. Naturally, as any child would not want to. Then, interesting plot twist, her father meets a new woman, right? And he gets remarried. And there's this new dynamic introduced into their relationship of this new woman. How is that going to influence now her relationships with these individuals? So she says, 2 years later, when dad remarried, I felt torn between my real mother and this new woman. On the car ride home from the wedding, she held out her henna-adorned hand, a tentative gesture of love. But in the absence of any normal mother-daughter dynamic, suspicion clenched my hand into a fist. So this student did not have a blueprint or a template of what a healthy mother-daughter relationship looked like. So when she was receiving these initial gestures of love from her stepmom, she was very suspicious, very wary, and super resistant to that because her experience with mother figures had not been very positive. Another year passed, and my stepmother's loving facade remained. How could she be pretending when she cooked my favorite pulao, or when she tenderly washed the oil from my hair, her pristine kameez getting soaked every time, or when she patiently taught me the Hindi grammar rules for genders, thrilling and pulling over and over again. So now, in contrast to her birth mother, her stepmother is consistent. She's there and she's not going anywhere. She's patient, even in spite of the students' resistance and cold demeanor to her. She's not going anywhere, right? And she's lovingly caring for her as though that were her own child. So later in the essay, I don't want to read through every single line, but the student auditions for the school play. And she goes up to perform, and she writes, on opening night, I took my final bow and was surprised to find my eyes involuntarily searching for my mom. Not stepmom, not new mom, just mom. So throughout the essay, we see her evolution of her relationship with her stepmother, right? Which is why she starts with not your typical Cinderella story, because it's sort of the reverse happening over here, where the stepmom is really someone who grows to become very dear to her.
Enough to be her mom.
Just mom.
Yeah.
Doesn't require a disclaimer or anything else. As you can see, this is a mixed up Cinderella story wherein the evil stepmother is a compassionate woman who taught me that motherhood is not defined by blood, birth, or even history. It's not a noun, but a verb. By choosing a different narrative, I found someone who, for the first time, made my family truly complete. So what I particularly like about this paragraph is she says, by choosing a different narrative, it is her own active decision to shift her perspective about the situation, right? And we didn't want to show this as something that was just happening to the student. And she's just recounting this happened and that happened. And I was just a passive participant in my own life. Like, it took a lot of work for this student to overcome her initial apprehensions and to really unlearn and relearn what it means to have a mother and to be a daughter. And by choosing a different narrative, she found someone who made my family truly complete. And I found that to be very powerful of an idea. In the next section of the essay, we sort of try to extrapolate that lesson to a broader life context. How is this going to help her overall in life, in college, as a student, as a professional? What is the skill here? So briefly, she says, as for my biological mother, unfortunately, we don't get to have a nice, neat, happily ever after. She made it clear that she never wanted to be married nor a mom. Understanding this and the beautiful opportunity that's arisen from it has helped me let go without malice. Cinderella, too, had to move on from loss. I suppose this is how relationships work in the real world. They're complex, messy, heartbreaking. Some you can't salvage. Others start out rocky but become the ones you cherish the most, if you make a conscious choice. Such is the human experience, and I'm prepared for this now. And at the end, she has dedication to mom and dad for my surprise fairy tale ending. And that's how the essay closes. And I really love the last two paragraphs. The closing abstracts a powerful lesson about real-world relationships. I find this to be incredibly mature. Just to have gone through something like this and to let go without malice, because she can see what a beautiful opportunity has arisen from it. I would never have gotten my stepmom if I had some kind of mom that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And for her to say, this is how relationships work in the real world. Some are messy, some are heartbreaking, and some are really, really beautiful and wonderful. I could imagine for an admissions officer, they would see this as someone who's really prepared to navigate interpersonal interactions throughout life. In academic settings, on campus settings, in jobs, in everywhere, right? And would be so sensitive, so compassionate, and so understanding of other people just because of what she's been through. All I can say is while reading this whole thing, like so much gratitude, so much positivity, and just like not harping on it, being like resigned. Fine, it didn't work out with the first thing, but look at all that I have with me right now. And there's this resignation and overall gratitude, positivity, and preparedness to move on in her stride. So that's what I loved about this essay, and I felt like this was one of those essays that did the trauma story pretty well.
Yeah. There's also like tons of vulnerability in there. She's not saying that, oh, I had a stepmom and I immediately opened up to her. She's not afraid to like show that she was very apprehensive. She was very closed off in the beginning, very suspicious. That just shows that she's a human, not a robot. You know, when I read this essay, there's this one line that really stayed with me where she writes about, I told her about my childhood and we both cried.
Yes.
That's a beautiful line in itself. But in terms of technicalities, it encompasses so much by saying just so little. Like, you know what this kid went through, and you know that, you know, she has a mom now. She wasn't a stepmother. She's the mother who stepped up to support. Yeah, I think it's, you know, one of those very powerful, moving essays. It leaves me with insight, like pushes me to sort of introspect and find things in my life that I'm grateful for.
I tried doing something different. Instead of thinking about, oh, what is the student making me think about herself? I thought, okay, let me take this journey with the student and see if I can feel what she's feeling. And the little movements from things didn't work out with my birth mother, but then there's my father who makes me happy, and then there's a sudden shift, there's suspicion, there's doubt, there's also this little annoyance that, you know, how can I deny that what she's doing is good? I can't be like that petty and say no to all of this, right? Like, I tried to see if I could be a co-passenger to her in her journey, and I felt like I was, because the little details about how she felt through everything, it was so honest, and there was no pretense about it. I could see myself in her place, even though I've had a very different life. I think what this essay made me think about was just that love is so undeniable that it transcends terminology. It doesn't need to be given shape or form in language, but rather what you do. Something that she says, that mom is not a noun, it's a word.
Yeah.
And I see that throughout the essay, like from the very beginning, where dad's doing little things for them. Their love language seems to be that of service, of care. And this is another thing the essay made me think about. So often we have this misconstrued idea of love propagated by fairy tales, right? And then we don't think about other things like care is important in a relationship. Showing up is important in a relationship. Time is so important.
It's not a big grand gesture, but the little things like washing my hair and like making my favorite pulao and, you know, attending a school play. Like, there's no big gesture involved here.
Perhaps you're right, and perhaps student isn't necessarily talking about, oh, you know, I understood love in so many ways, but the fact that it made me think about it in so many ways through each of these careful demonstrations from their life, it kind of won me over.
And one final note I will make is that I think what worked well about this essay is the specificity that she used to bring that love and that care to life. So rather than saying, oh, you know, my stepmother grew on me because she showed me love over time, she gave very specific, very small examples of cooking pulao, washing oil from my hair while getting splashed herself, teaching me Hindi grammar, which is arguably one of the most difficult tasks to teach a young child, right? The consistency, but also the tiny examples.
And like the effort, like
right.
the effort behind the scenes that the mom put in.
And similarly, in the opening, when she gives very small examples of what her dad did, play acting with them, right? I think anyone who grown up close to their dad, like they've seen them do goofy stuff together and weaving the hair clumsily. Like she could have easily said, yeah, my dad was wonderful and very caring and very sweet and we loved him. But she didn't say that. She said that his eyes crinkled up, you know, whenever he caught a glimpse of us. For anyone, like any student who's thinking about, you know, writing their essay, we would always say, like, go specific, go for those tiny details that exemplify the deeper meaning, as opposed to just trying to say it, as opposed, you know, this is showing, not telling, basically.
The comparison between the little acts dad does versus the little acts mom does is very, I think subconsciously, maybe this wasn't intentional, but subconsciously it kind of shows that, okay, these are the acts of care and love that I recognize, that I soon began to recognize in this new person in my life.
Yeah.
So that comparison from the beginning to end, it kind of works, it just goes so seamlessly forward that you know that this is a person not only capable of loving so much, but also receiving love with a little bit of doubt in an open-hearted manner. So, you know, you don't see the cynical person that you would expect. You see somebody who is just so full of love and acceptance and ready for so much more going to college.
Yeah, it's interesting. She says, I lacked any normal mother-daughter dynamic. But she did have a blueprint for love. It was her dad, right? Yeah. So she was saying, I struggled because I didn't have a mother who showed me what love meant. But her dad showed her. Yeah. And that's why she was able to see it. Yeah. And to me, it makes me feel like this is someone who's also going to love many people so deeply, right? Any friend in her life, anybody in her life is going to feel the depth of that love because of what she went through.
And receive it.
Which is also very difficult for people. A lot of people struggle with that. So anyway, we love this essay. We love the not so typical Cinderella story.
Yeah. Where is she now?
She's at Dartmouth. Oh. And always had this very social justice, activism kind of energy, which is not surprising somehow from reading this as well. So it's a good fit.